The rain had been falling over the sleepy town of Ashwood since late afternoon, wrapping every street in a silver blanket of quiet. Inside a small wooden house at the edge of Maple Lane, 72-year-old Walter Bennett settled into his favorite rocking chair beside the fireplace. The gentle crackle of burning oak filled the room while an old clock ticked patiently against the wall. Every evening followed the same peaceful rhythm. A cup of warm chamomile tea rested on the table beside him, and his loyal golden retriever, Rusty, lay curled near the glowing fire. Walter had lived in Ashwood for nearly his entire life. He had watched children become parents, tiny trees grow into towering oaks, and old neighbors slowly disappear from familiar porches. Yet despite the passing years, one mystery had never left his thoughts. Hidden somewhere beyond the Whispering Pines forest stood an abandoned cabin that no one seemed willing to visit anymore. The older residents rarely spoke about it, and whenever they did, their voices softened, as though afraid of waking forgotten memories. Tonight felt different. The rain eased into a gentle drizzle, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine through a slightly open window. Rusty suddenly lifted his head, ears alert, staring toward the darkness outside. Walter paused his rocking. Then came 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. No one ever visited this late. Walter reached for his lantern, slipped on his weathered boots, and walked toward the front door. His hand rested on the brass handle for a brief moment before he slowly opened it. No one stood on the porch. Only a small wooden box sat neatly on the welcome mat, tied with faded blue ribbon. Resting on top was a single handwritten note containing just 5 words. "It's finally time to remember." Walter barely slept that night. The old brass key rested on his bedside table, catching the soft glow of the moon whenever clouds drifted away. Every time he closed his eyes, the faded photograph returned to his thoughts. The faces of the 3 friends felt strangely familiar, yet their names remained hidden somewhere beyond his memory. It was as if time itself had carefully locked away an important part of his life. Before sunrise, Ashwood was wrapped in a cool blanket of morning mist. The streets were quiet, and the only sounds came from distant birds greeting the new day. Walter brewed a fresh cup of coffee while Rusty waited patiently by the front door, his tail gently brushing across the wooden floor. The faithful dog seemed unusually excited, almost as though he understood that an adventure was about to begin. Walter folded the old map and slipped it into the pocket of his weathered jacket. The brass key went into another pocket where he could easily reach it. He paused for a moment before leaving the house, looking around the familiar living room filled with books, photographs, and memories collected over a lifetime. Something deep inside him whispered that he might not return home as the same man. The drive toward Whispering Pines forest took nearly 40 minutes. The narrow country road curved through rolling hills covered with golden fields and tall maple trees. Morning sunlight slowly burned away the fog, revealing sparkling streams and quiet wooden fences stretching across the countryside. It was the same road Walter had traveled countless times during his younger years, yet today everything seemed different, as though the landscape itself had been patiently waiting for his return. He parked beside an old trailhead where a faded wooden sign still read, "Whispering Pines Nature Trail." Moss covered much of the lettering, and wildflowers had grown around the base of the post. Walter locked the truck, adjusted his backpack, and began walking with Rusty leading a few steps ahead. The forest welcomed them with peaceful silence. Towering pine trees filtered the morning sunlight into long golden beams that danced across the forest floor. Birds sang gentle melodies high above, while squirrels hurried between branches carrying acorns. The air smelled fresh with pine needles, damp earth, and wild herbs growing beneath the trees. After nearly an hour of walking, Walter noticed something unusual. Along the side of the trail stood several small stone markers arranged in a perfect line. Each carried the carving of a tiny pine tree, worn smooth by decades of rain and wind. Walter knelt beside one marker and gently brushed away patches of moss. On the back, barely visible, were the initials, WB. His own initials. A chill traveled through him despite the warm morning air. He searched the nearby ground, hoping another memory would surface, but nothing came. Rusty gave a quiet bark from farther up the trail. Walter looked ahead. Walter stopped walking. The open door of the cabin swayed ever so slightly, moving with the gentle morning breeze. It made no sound, only a slow, almost welcoming motion. Rusty stood still beside Walter, his ears raised, watching the dark doorway without barking. Walter took a slow breath and stepped onto the weathered porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath his boots, but the cabin itself remained silent. Sunlight slipped through the towering pines, casting long shadows across the faded walls. It was hard to believe no one had lived here for so many years. Inside, the air smelled of old cedar, dust, and time. A stone fireplace stood against the far wall, its ashes long cold. Shelves lined with worn books leaned slightly under their own weight. An old rocking chair rested near the window, facing the forest as though someone had only just stepped away. Walter slowly explored each corner. Nothing seemed disturbed, no footprints, no fresh food, no signs that anyone had visited recently. Yet everything was strangely clean. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a small wooden carving of a pine tree. Walter reached for it, and the moment his fingers touched the smooth wood, a faint memory flickered through his mind. 4 young friends laughing around a campfire. A promise made beneath a sky full of stars. Then the vision disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Walter placed the carving back where he found it. Rusty suddenly walked toward a large bookshelf against the back wall. Instead of sniffing the books, he gently nudged the side of the shelf with his nose. A soft clicking sound echoed through the room. Walter frowned. He pushed against the shelf. To his surprise, it slowly swung outward, revealing a narrow staircase leading underground. Cool air drifted upward from the darkness below. Walter lit his old lantern and looked down the stone steps. The walls were built from rough rock, disappearing into shadows that the lantern could barely reach. His heart beat a little faster. The map had never mentioned a hidden room. Holding the lantern in one hand and keeping the brass key safely in his pocket, Walter carefully descended the staircase. Rusty followed closely behind. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small underground chamber. In the center of the room stood a heavy oak chest covered with dust but untouched by decay. Its iron lock was polished, almost shining. Walter reached into his pocket. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Some mysteries could never be forgotten. Others, once opened, could never be closed again. Taking one final breath, Walter slowly turned the key. A loud metallic click echoed through the hidden chamber. The lid began to lift on its own. Before Walter could see what was inside, a warm golden light poured from the chest, filling the entire underground room and illuminating every stone wall with a soft, mysterious glow.
The golden light did not burn Walter's eyes. Instead, it felt warm and peaceful, like the first rays of sunrise after a long winter. As the glow slowly faded, the contents of the chest became clear. There was no treasure. No gold coins. No precious jewels. Inside rested a leather-bound journal, a silver pocket watch, a bundle of handwritten letters tied with green string, and a small compass with a cracked glass cover. Every item looked carefully preserved, waiting for someone to return. Walter gently picked up the journal. The worn leather felt familiar beneath his fingers. When he opened the first page, his breath caught. "If you are reading this, Walter, then you finally found our promise." The words were written in neat handwriting that he immediately recognized, though he could not remember the owner's face. He turned another page. Each entry described joyful days spent exploring the forest with 3 lifelong friends. They built tree houses, fished in quiet streams, and watched meteor showers from a nearby hill. The journal spoke of laughter, friendship, and dreams that seemed impossible to break. Then the tone changed. One entry described a terrible storm that arrived without warning. The 4 friends had taken shelter inside this very cabin. During that frightening night, they made a promise to create a place where their happiest memories would always remain safe, no matter where life carried them. Walter closed his eyes. Fragments of forgotten memories drifted back like leaves on the wind. A campfire. Shared stories. 4 hands placed together. A promise spoken beneath the stars. Rusty gave a gentle bark. Walter looked toward the far wall. The silver pocket watch, which had not moved for decades, suddenly began ticking. Tick. 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 Its hands slowly turned by themselves until they stopped at exactly 7:15. At that same moment, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. A section of the stone wall slid open, revealing another hidden passage stretching deeper beneath Whispering Pines forest. Cool air drifted from the darkness. Somewhere far ahead, a faint melody echoed through the tunnel. It sounded like someone quietly humming a song Walter had not heard since he was a young boy. He stood perfectly still. For the first time, he wondered if he was truly alone. Walter lifted his lantern and stared into the hidden passage. The faint melody continued, drifting through the tunnel like a forgotten lullaby carried by the wind. It was soft, calm, and strangely comforting. Rusty stood close beside him, his tail still, listening with the same quiet attention. Taking a careful step forward, Walter entered the narrow passage. The walls were carved from smooth gray stone, and tiny drops of water shimmered in the lantern's light. The air felt cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp rock mixed with the fresh fragrance of pine roots reaching deep beneath the forest. The melody grew clearer. Walter couldn't remember the words, but somehow his heart recognized the tune. It reminded him of peaceful summer evenings when laughter echoed through the trees and the world seemed wonderfully simple. After several minutes, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber unlike anything Walter had ever imagined. Hundreds of glass lanterns hung from the ceiling, glowing with a gentle golden light despite having no flames inside them. The room felt warm and welcoming, as if it had been waiting patiently for decades. In the center stood a round wooden table covered with dust. 4 chairs surrounded it. 3 remained empty. The 4th was slightly pulled back, as though someone had stood up only moments ago. Walter slowly walked toward the table. Resting in its center was a small wooden music box carved with tiny pine trees. As he approached, the melody stopped. Silence filled the chamber. Then, without anyone touching it, the music box slowly opened. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Walter carefully unfolded it. Only one sentence was written in elegant handwriting. "The others are waiting where the stars touch the lake." Walter looked up, his heartbeat steady but filled with wonder. He had finally remembered one promise. Now it seemed 3 old friends were waiting for him to remember the rest. Walter folded the note with great care and placed it inside the journal. The words stayed with him as he left the underground chamber. "Where the stars touch the lake." It sounded less like directions and more like a memory waiting to be uncovered. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall pines as Walter and Rusty stepped back into the forest. The fresh air felt warmer than before, carrying the gentle scent of wildflowers and pine needles. For a moment, Walter simply stood there, listening to the wind moving softly through the trees. He opened the old map again. Near the northern edge of Whispering Pines forest was a small drawing of a lake. Beside it, someone had sketched a tiny star. Walter smiled faintly. He had overlooked that symbol earlier. The walk toward the lake was peaceful. A narrow trail wound through fields of ferns and crossed a wooden bridge over a clear stream. Tiny fish glided beneath the surface while dragonflies hovered above the water, their wings sparkling in the sunlight. Rusty happily trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to wait for Walter before continuing. As evening slowly approached, the trees began to thin. Beyond them lay a beautiful lake, perfectly still, reflecting the sky like polished glass. The setting sun painted the water with shades of orange, pink, and gold. It was one of the most peaceful places Walter had ever seen. Near the shore stood an old wooden dock. At the end of the dock rested a single rowboat, gently rocking with the small ripples. It looked surprisingly well cared for, as though someone had visited only hours before. Walter stepped closer and noticed fresh footprints in the soft sand. They were not his. They were not old. Rusty sniffed them carefully before looking across the lake. Far away, on the opposite shore, Walter spotted a tiny light glowing among the trees. Someone was there. Without saying a word, Walter untied the rowboat, climbed inside with Rusty, and slowly pushed away from the dock. The calm water carried them silently toward the mysterious light, while the first stars of the evening began to appear above the quiet lake. The rowboat drifted quietly across the mirror-like lake. Walter dipped the wooden oars into the water with slow, steady strokes, creating gentle ripples that faded almost as quickly as they appeared. Above them, the evening sky deepened into shades of blue and violet, while the first stars reflected perfectly on the calm surface below. Rusty sat at the front of the boat, watching the distant light without taking his eyes off it. He seemed calm, yet completely focused, as if he already knew where they were going. The glowing light grew brighter as they neared the opposite shore. It wasn't a lantern or a campfire. Instead, it came from an old stone lighthouse that stood alone among the trees. Its walls were covered with climbing ivy, and although it appeared abandoned, a warm light shone steadily from the room at the very top. Walter tied the boat to a weathered wooden post and stepped onto the shore. A narrow path led through tall grass toward the lighthouse door. Every step felt strangely familiar. When he reached the entrance, he noticed another carving of a pine tree, exactly like the ones he had seen on the stone markers in the forest. Beneath it were 4 initials: WB, EC, HM, SR. Walter recognized his own initials immediately, but the other 3 stirred only faint echoes in his memory. The heavy wooden door opened with a gentle push. Inside, a spiral staircase climbed toward the glowing light above. As Walter reached the top, he found a round room with wide windows overlooking the lake. In the center stood an old telescope pointed toward the night sky. Beside it rested a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were the words, "Open this only when you are ready to remember every goodbye." Walter's hand hovered over the envelope. Outside, a bright shooting star streaked silently across the sky, disappearing beyond the dark horizon. For the first time in many years, Walter felt both hope and fear at the exact same moment. Walter stood quietly in the lighthouse tower, holding the sealed envelope in both hands. The paper had turned slightly yellow with age, yet the wax seal remained unbroken. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the starlight, so calm that it seemed to reflect another world. He slowly broke the seal. Inside was a single letter, folded with remarkable care. The handwriting was elegant and familiar. "Dear Walter," it began, "if this letter has reached you, then the journey has unfolded exactly as we hoped. You may not remember us yet, but that was never your fault. Time has a gentle way of protecting hearts that have carried too much sorrow." Walter paused, his chest tightening. The letter continued. 40 years ago, the 4 of us made one final promise. We knew that life would scatter us across different roads. We also knew that one day, one of us would return to gather the memories we left behind. You were chosen because you always believed that friendship could outlast time. Walter looked toward the old telescope. For a brief moment, another memory surfaced. 4 young friends standing on this very lighthouse balcony, laughing as they watched a shower of shooting stars. One of them pointed toward the sky and said, "No matter where life takes us, we'll always meet where the stars touch the lake." The memory faded, but this time it left something behind. A name. Emma. Walter whispered it softly. Emma. The name felt warm, like hearing the voice of someone he had loved as family. Rusty suddenly walked to the window and gave a quiet bark. Walter followed his gaze. Across the lake, deep within the forest, dozens of tiny golden lights had appeared between the trees. They moved slowly, almost like floating lanterns, forming a glowing path into the darkness. At the bottom of the letter, one final sentence waited. "Follow the lights." The next memory is waiting, and so is Emma's story. Walter carefully folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket. He looked once more at the peaceful lake before beginning the journey back down the spiral staircase. Somewhere beyond those glowing lights, another forgotten chapter of his life was ready to be remembered. Walter and Rusty crossed the lake in silence. The lighthouse slowly disappeared behind them, its warm glow fading into the distance until it became only a tiny star against the dark shoreline. Ahead, the mysterious golden lights continued to drift among the trees, patiently waiting. When the boat reached the dock, Walter stepped onto the shore and followed the glowing trail into Whispering Pines Forest. The lights floated just above the ground, moving neither too fast nor too slow, as though they wanted him to keep up. Rusty stayed close, his ears alert but his body relaxed. The forest at night felt different. Moonlight filtered through the towering pines, painting silver patterns across the path. Crickets sang from the tall grass, and a cool breeze gently rustled the branches overhead. Instead of fear, Walter felt an unexpected sense of peace. After nearly half an hour, the lights gathered in a small clearing. At its center stood a magnificent old oak tree, far larger than any Walter had ever seen. Its enormous branches stretched toward the sky, and hundreds of tiny glass jars hung from them. Each jar held a soft golden glow, gently swaying in the night breeze like captured stars. Beneath the tree rested a simple wooden bench. Walter slowly sat down. As soon as he did, one of the glowing jars drifted from the branches and settled gently into his hands. Inside was a folded photograph. He carefully opened it. It showed a smiling young woman with bright eyes and long brown hair sitting beneath this very oak tree. On the back, written in graceful handwriting, were the words, "Emma Collins. Summer of 1984. She always believed memories should be shared, never hidden." Walter stared at the photograph, and another memory returned. Emma laughing. Emma reading stories aloud while the others listened beneath the stars. Emma promising that every story deserved someone willing to remember it. A warm tear rolled slowly down Walter's cheek. For the first time, he didn't just remember a name. He remembered a friend. Above him, another glowing jar gently began to descend from the great oak, carrying the next forgotten piece of the past. Walter carefully placed Emma's photograph inside the leather journal before looking up at the ancient oak. The glowing jars continued to sway gently above him, each one shining with its own soft golden light. Somehow, he knew that every jar held a memory waiting to be found. Another jar floated down until it rested in his hands. This one was heavier. Inside was not a photograph but a small cassette tape with a handwritten label. Campfire Stories, August 1984. Walter smiled. He had not seen a cassette tape in years. As he examined it, Rusty began sniffing around the base of the tree. Hidden among the roots was an old metal box. Walter knelt beside it and brushed away leaves and dirt. The lid creaked open to reveal a small battery-powered cassette player, perfectly protected from time. It was as though someone had expected him to arrive. He inserted the tape and pressed play. For a second, only static filled the air. Then came laughter. Real laughter. Young voices echoed through the quiet forest. Walter's heart skipped a beat. He recognized his own voice, decades younger, joking with his friends around a crackling campfire. Emma laughed first. Then another cheerful voice said, "Henry, stop pretending you know how to cook." Everyone burst into laughter. A deeper voice replied, "One day you'll miss my famous campfire chili." Walter smiled without realizing it. Another name had returned. Henry. The recording continued with stories, friendly teasing, and the comforting sounds of a summer night. Listening to it felt like sitting beside them once again. Near the end of the tape, the voices became quiet. Emma spoke softly. "If any of us ever forget these moments, promise we'll leave pieces of them behind, so one day we can find our way back." 4 voices answered together. "We promise." The tape clicked to an end. Silence returned beneath the great oak. Walter looked at the glowing jars overhead. He now remembered 2 friends. Emma. Henry. One name still remained hidden in the shadows of his past. At that very moment, the brightest jar in the tree began to glow more intensely than all the others, slowly descending toward him as a gentle breeze whispered through the forest. The brightest jar floated gently into Walter's hands, glowing with a warm light that seemed almost alive. Unlike the others, this jar was sealed with a small silver clasp shaped like a pine cone. Walter opened it carefully, and a folded piece of blue paper slipped into his palm. It was a handwritten map. Not a map of the forest, but of Ashwood itself. Several familiar places were marked with small stars. The old library, the town square, Maple Lane, the lighthouse, and finally, a place simply labeled the garden. Walter frowned. He had lived in Ashwood for most of his life, yet he couldn't remember any garden important enough to be marked this way. Tucked inside the map was another note. The last memory grows where hope is planted. Rusty suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the eastern edge of the clearing. A narrow trail, almost hidden beneath ferns and wildflowers, seemed to appear where there had been none before. Walter followed it. The path curved gently through the forest until the trees slowly opened into a quiet meadow. Moonlight bathed the field in silver, and thousands of white wildflowers stretched across the landscape like a soft blanket. At the center stood a small wooden gate. A weathered sign hung above it. The Memory Garden. Walter's heart raced. He pushed the gate open. Inside, dozens of flowering plants surrounded a circular stone fountain. Small wooden plaques stood beside each flower bed, each engraved with a name. Some belonged to people Walter had known as a child. Others were complete strangers. Near the fountain stood one final flower bed that had no flowers at all. Only an empty patch of rich soil. Its plaque read, "Reserved for the final promise." Walter knelt beside the empty bed. As he touched the cool earth, another memory flickered in his mind. Four young friends stood together, each planting a tiny seed. Emma smiled and said, "Even if we're gone someday, kindness will keep growing." Walter opened his eyes. The empty flower bed suddenly shimmered in the moonlight. Then, before him, a single green sprout slowly emerged from the soil. Someone, or something, had just awakened the final promise. Walter remained kneeling beside the tiny green sprout, hardly daring to breathe. Under the silver moonlight, the fragile stem swayed gently, although there was no wind. Rusty sat quietly beside him, watching the little plant with calm, curious eyes. The memory garden was completely silent. Then came the soft sound of footsteps. Walter turned quickly. An elderly woman was slowly walking along the stone path toward the fountain. She wore a long gray coat and carried an old watering can in one hand. Her silver hair rested neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and her gentle smile seemed strangely familiar. "Good evening, Walter," she said warmly. Walter blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" The woman nodded. "I've been expecting you." She poured a little water onto the tiny sprout. Almost immediately, two fresh green leaves unfolded beneath the moonlight. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "For many years, I've cared for this garden while waiting for someone to finish what four young friends began." Walter's heart skipped a beat. "You knew us?" "I did." She smiled toward the fountain. "I wasn't one of your friends. I was the librarian in Ashwood. Every Saturday, the four of you visited together. Emma always borrowed books filled with adventures. Henry loved books about the stars. You searched for history, and your fourth friend could never leave without a mystery novel." Walter closed his eyes. Another memory slowly returned. A cheerful young man with dark hair laughing as he balanced a stack of books much taller than himself. A name quietly surfaced. Eleanor smiled. "Yes. Samuel Reed." The final forgotten name had returned. Walter felt as though a missing piece of his heart had finally found its place. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small bronze seed. "This was meant for you," she said softly. The four of you agreed that whoever remembered everyone would plant the final seed. Walter looked at the empty flower bed. He gently pressed the bronze seed into the rich soil beside the tiny sprout. The earth trembled ever so slightly. Golden light spread through the garden, flowing beneath every flower like warm sunlight after rain. One by one, flowers that had been closed for the night slowly bloomed. The sweet fragrance filled the cool evening air. Eleanor looked toward the stars and whispered, "Your promise is almost complete." Walter gazed across the glowing garden. For the first time in 40 years, he remembered every friend who had once shared this extraordinary journey. But deep inside, he sensed that the greatest secret was still waiting to be discovered. The garden glowed long after the last flower had bloomed. Soft golden light flowed through every path, reflecting in the stone fountain like liquid sunlight. Walter stood quietly, overwhelmed by the beauty surrounding him. Rusty wandered among the flowers, careful not to disturb a single blossom. Eleanor walked to the fountain and gently placed her hand on its edge. "When you and your friends created this place," she said, "you believed memories could inspire kindness. Every person who visited here left with a little more hope than they arrived with." Walter looked around the garden again. He noticed that each flower bed held more than a name. Tiny brass plaques contained short messages. "Always choose compassion. Listen before you speak. Share your stories. Leave every place a little brighter than you found it." Walter smiled. Those simple words felt timeless. Eleanor reached beneath the fountain and pulled out a small wooden box. Unlike the mysterious chest beneath the cabin, this one was plain and unadorned. "It belongs to you," she said. Walter opened it. Inside lay 4 friendship bracelets, each woven from faded blue, green, red, and golden threads. Time had worn them, but they were still beautifully crafted. Without thinking, Walter slipped the blue bracelet onto his wrist. The moment it touched his skin, another memory returned. The 4 friends, barely 18 years old, sat beside the lake on the final evening before leaving Ashwood to begin different lives. None of them wanted to say goodbye. Emma had tied a bracelet around each friend's wrist. "No matter how far we travel," she had whispered, "our hearts will always know the way home." The memory faded, leaving Walter with a peaceful smile instead of sadness. He looked back into the box. Beneath the bracelets rested a folded page from Emma's handwriting. It contained only one sentence. "Tomorrow morning, meet us where the first sunrise touches Ashwood." Walter carefully folded the note and placed it inside his journal. He looked toward the eastern horizon. The stars were beginning to fade. A new day was almost here. Somewhere beyond the hills, the first light of dawn was waiting to reveal the next chapter of a promise that had survived 4 decades. Walter gently patted Rusty's head. "Come on, old friend," he whispered. "Let's watch one more sunrise." The eastern sky slowly changed from deep blue to soft shades of lavender and gold as Walter and Rusty made their way through the quiet streets of Ashwood. The town was still asleep. Porch lights glowed faintly, and a cool morning breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from the old bakery on Main Street. Walter followed the map one last time. The final star was marked on a hill overlooking the town, a place known years ago as Sunrise Point. He remembered climbing that hill countless times as a teenager, though he had almost forgotten it existed. The path was steep but peaceful. Birds greeted the morning with gentle songs, and tiny drops of dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. Rusty happily climbed ahead, stopping every few moments to look back at Walter. When they reached the top, the horizon was glowing. A single wooden bench overlooked the entire valley. It was old, weathered by decades of wind and rain, yet it remained standing proudly. Walter sat down. As the first rays of sunlight rose above the distant hills, they bathed Ashwood in warm golden light. The rooftops shimmered, the lake reflected the sunrise like polished glass, and Whispering Pines forest stretched peacefully beyond the town. Walter closed his eyes. He could almost hear laughter beside him. Emma, Henry, Samuel, and a younger version of himself. For one beautiful moment, it felt as though all 4 friends were watching the sunrise together again. When Walter opened his eyes, a small wooden plaque had appeared on the bench. It read, "Friendship is not measured by the years we spend together, but by the memories that continue to guide us long after we part." Walter smiled. His journey had begun with forgotten memories. Now it had become something far greater. It had become a reminder that love, friendship, and kindness never truly disappear. They live quietly in the stories we tell, the promises we keep, and the lives we touch. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, Walter stood, placed a gentle hand on Rusty's head, and began the peaceful walk back toward Ashwood, carrying with him the greatest treasure he had ever found. A heart that finally remembered its way home. Walter and Rusty walked back into Ashwood as the town slowly came to life. Shopkeepers unlocked their doors, bicycles rolled along quiet streets, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the small cafe on the corner. Everything looked familiar, yet Walter saw the town with new eyes. Every street held a memory. Every building seemed to whisper a forgotten story. As he reached Maple Lane, something unusual caught his attention. Resting neatly against his front door was another package. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with the same faded blue ribbon that had been around the very first wooden box. Walter carried it inside and carefully untied the ribbon. Inside was an old leather photo album. Across its cover, embossed in faded gold letters, were the words, "Lifeline." His hands trembled slightly. He opened the first page. There were photographs of the four friends throughout the years. Fishing by the lake, building a treehouse, reading books beneath the ancient oak, and laughing around countless campfires. Every picture captured moments of pure happiness. Near the middle of the album, Walter found an empty page. Only one sentence appeared beneath it. "Every generation deserves a story that helps them sleep with hope." Walter sat silently, reading the words again. For the first time, he understood why Emma had treasured stories so deeply. Stories weren't simply memories. They were gifts. A way to pass kindness, courage, and comfort from one heart to another. Rusty rested his head on Walter's knee as sunlight poured through the living room window. Walter reached for a blank notebook on the nearby shelf. He uncapped an old fountain pen. Then, with a peaceful smile, he wrote the very first sentence of a brand new story. Outside, the wind carried the gentle sound of pine trees swaying in the distance. Inside, a new journey quietly began. Not a journey to recover forgotten memories, but one to create beautiful new ones, one story at a time. Walter woke before dawn, as he had done for most of his life. The notebook he had started the previous morning rested on the table beside the leather photo album. He smiled as he read the first few lines he had written. The words felt natural, as though they had been waiting patiently inside him for years. Rusty stretched lazily, then walked to the window. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall. Tiny drops tapped softly against the glass, filling the house with a peaceful rhythm. Walter poured himself a cup of warm tea and returned to the notebook. He wrote about quiet forests, kind strangers, forgotten promises, and the comfort of finding your way home. As each page filled, he felt lighter, as if every sentence carried away a little of the weight he had held for so long. Hours passed unnoticed. A soft knock at the front door interrupted the silence. Walter opened it to find a young girl standing on the porch. She was no older than 12 and held a small basket of freshly baked muffins. "My grandmother asked me to bring these," she said with a smile. "She said you might enjoy some company." Walter welcomed her inside. The girl noticed the old photo album on the table. "Those people look happy," she said. "They were," Walter replied. Instead of answering with facts, he began telling her a story. He spoke of brave hearts, peaceful lakes, glowing lanterns, and friends who believed that kindness could outlive time itself. The girl listened without interrupting, her eyes filled with wonder. When the story ended, she smiled. "I hope I have friends like that someday." Walter smiled warmly. "I believe you will." As she left, she turned around and said, "Thank you for the story." Walter closed the door gently. He realized something important. The greatest adventures were not hidden in forests or old cabins anymore. They lived in every story shared from one heart to another. He picked up his pen once again, ready to write the next page. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft and steady, wrapping Ashwood in the same peaceful silence where this unforgettable journey had first begun. The rain finally stopped just before sunset, leaving Ashwood fresh and quiet. Water shimmered on the sidewalks, and the scent of wet pine drifted through the cool evening air. Walter closed his notebook, slipped on his jacket, and decided to take Rusty for a walk through town. As they passed the old library, Walter noticed that its front doors were open. Warm light spilled onto the stone steps, and cheerful voices floated outside. Curious, he stepped in. The librarian greeted him with a smile. "Perfect timing," she said. "We're hosting our weekly story circle." He told the story of a peaceful forest where every tree remembered the laughter of old friends. He described quiet lakes that reflected the stars and little lanterns that glowed with hope instead of fire. No one interrupted. Even the youngest children listened with wide, curious eyes. When he finished, the room remained silent for a moment. Then warm applause filled the library. A little boy raised his hand. "Do you think places can really remember people?" Walter smiled. "I think people leave kindness behind wherever they go. Sometimes a place simply reminds us to look for it." The librarian handed Walter a small wooden bookmark carved with a pine tree. "For our newest storyteller," she said. Walter thanked her and carefully placed the bookmark inside his notebook. As he and Rusty walked home beneath the first evening stars, Walter realized that Emma had been right all along. Stories were like seeds. Once shared, they quietly grew in the hearts of others. And somewhere in Ashwood that night, a child would fall asleep dreaming of forests, friendships, and the gentle promise that hope could always be found again. A gentle fog settled over Ashwood the next morning, wrapping the town in a peaceful blanket of white. Walter opened his front door and smiled as he found a small envelope resting on the welcome mat. It wasn't addressed to him. Instead, the front simply read, "To the next storyteller." Walter carried the envelope inside and carefully opened it. A single sheet of paper unfolded in his hands. "Every story you share becomes someone else's memory. Keep telling them." There was no signature. Only a tiny drawing of a pine tree in the corner. Walter slipped the note into his notebook and headed toward the town square with Rusty. The weekly farmers' market had already begun. Neighbors greeted one another warmly, children laughed as they chased pigeons across the brick walkway, and musicians played soft acoustic melodies beneath the old clock tower. As Walter walked through the market, several people stopped to thank him for the story he had read at the library the night before. One elderly man smiled. "My grandson couldn't stop talking about your forest. He asked if we could go camping together." A young mother added, "My daughter fell asleep smiling. She said she dreamed about glowing lanterns." Walter felt a quiet happiness growing inside him. His stories were doing exactly what Emma had always hoped. They were bringing people closer together. Before leaving the market, Walter noticed a wooden box sitting beneath a large oak tree in the center of the square. A sign beside it read, "Leave a story. Take a story." Inside were dozens of handwritten pages from people of every age. Some were funny. Some were sad. Some were filled with hope. Walter gently placed one of his own stories into the box. Then he picked another at random. The first sentence read, "Once, four friends made a promise that kindness would never be forgotten." Walter smiled warmly. The promise no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to everyone willing to share a story, listen with an open heart, and pass a little hope to the next person they met. As Rusty wagged his tail beside him, Walter realized that the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind wasn't wealth or fame. It was a story that continued to bring light long after the storyteller was gone. The following evening, Walter sat on his front porch as the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills. Rusty rested at his feet, watching fireflies blink across the yard. The quiet rhythm of the town settled around them, and for the first time in many years, Walter felt completely at peace. A gentle breeze stirred the pages of his notebook. One blank page stopped turning. Across the top, in Emma's familiar handwriting, a sentence slowly appeared as if written by an invisible hand. "Every ending is the beginning of another story." Walter smiled instead of feeling surprised. He picked up his pen and wrote beneath her words. "Then let this story belong to everyone who needs it." Just then, footsteps approached along Maple Lane. The young girl who had brought him muffins stood at the gate, holding a notebook against her chest. "I started writing," she said shyly. Walter invited her to sit beside him. She opened her notebook and began reading a short story about a lonely bird that discovered a forest where every tree sang a different lullaby. Her voice trembled at first, but soon it grew stronger. When she finished, Walter applauded gently. "That's a beautiful beginning," he said. She smiled. "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" "Stories don't have to be perfect." Walter nodded. "They only have to be honest." The stars slowly filled the evening sky. Somewhere in the distance, the old lighthouse shone across the peaceful lake, while whispering pines forest whispered softly in the night breeze. Walter closed his notebook. The promise made by 4 young friends decades earlier had traveled farther than they could ever have imagined. It had become a gift passed from one generation to the next. And as another peaceful night settled over Ashwood, new stories quietly began finding their own storytellers. Some would be told beside warm fireplaces. Some beneath star-filled skies. Some just before someone drifted peacefully to sleep. But every one of them would carry the same quiet message. Hope grows when it is shared. And every heart, no matter how lost it may feel, can always find its way home through a beautiful story. The next morning arrived wrapped in golden sunlight. Birds sang from the maple trees outside Walter's home, and the scent of fresh pine drifted through the open windows. Rusty waited patiently by the front door, his leash already hanging from Walter's hand. Their morning walks had become a quiet tradition. As they wandered through Ashwood, Walter noticed something unusual. More people were carrying notebooks. Children sat on park benches writing stories. Elderly neighbors exchanged handwritten pages instead of newspapers. Even the owner of the little bakery had placed a wooden basket near the register with a sign that read, "Take a story with your bread." Walter smiled. Without realizing it, Emma's dream was beginning to bloom throughout the town. They continued toward the lake, where the water reflected the bright blue sky like polished glass. A young father sat on the dock reading one of Walter's stories to his little son. The boy leaned against his father's shoulder, listening quietly. As Walter walked past, the father looked up. "Thank you," he said softly. "My son asks for your stories every night before bed." Walter felt warmth spread through his heart. "I hope they help him dream beautiful dreams." "They do," the father replied. "He says your stories make the world feel kinder." Those simple words stayed with Walter long after they continued walking. Later that afternoon, he returned to the memory garden. The tiny sprout he had planted was no longer small. It had grown into a young sapling with bright green leaves dancing in the breeze. Eleanor was waiting beside it. She smiled as Walter approached. "The tree grows every time someone shares a story with kindness," she explained. Walter looked around in amazement. "So, it's connected to the people of Ashwood?" Eleanor nodded. "Not only Ashwood." She pointed toward the sky. "Every story that brings comfort, hope, or peace gives this tree new life." Walter gently touched one of its leaves. For a brief moment, the leaf glowed with warm golden light. Far above, another shooting star crossed the afternoon sky, visible for only an instant. Walter smiled. The promise was still growing. Not hidden in old memories anymore, but alive in every heart willing to listen, imagine, and pass a story on. Several days passed peacefully in Ashwood. Each evening, Walter wrote another chapter in his notebook, and each morning, someone new discovered one of his stories. The little town seemed brighter than ever. Strangers smiled at one another more often, neighbors lingered on their front porches, and laughter drifted through the streets long after sunset. One quiet afternoon, Walter received an unexpected visitor. A mail carrier handed him a thick envelope stamped from another state. There was no return address. Inside, Walter found dozens of handwritten letters. The first one read, "Dear Mr. Bennett, my grandmother read one of your stories to me while I was recovering in the hospital. It became my favorite bedtime story. Thank you for giving me peaceful dreams." Walter swallowed gently and reached for the next letter. "Your stories helped my father fall asleep after many difficult nights. We read one together every evening." Another letter came from a schoolteacher. "Our students now begin every Friday by sharing stories of kindness inspired by your writing." Walter sat quietly by the window, reading each letter with care. Every page reminded him that simple words could travel farther than he had ever imagined. Rusty rested his head on Walter's lap as the final letter slipped from the envelope. Unlike the others, it contained no message. Only a small pressed white flower. Walter recognized it immediately. It was the same kind that grew in the memory garden. Tucked behind the flower was a tiny card. "Hope blossoms wherever stories are shared." That evening, Walter walked to the garden. The young tree had grown taller again, its branches now reaching toward the evening sky. Something new caught his attention. Tiny white flowers had begun blooming around its roots, the very same flowers pressed inside the envelope. Eleanor smiled as she joined him. "The tree is no longer growing because of memories," she said softly. "It grows because hope keeps spreading." Walter looked across the peaceful garden, where children quietly read stories beneath the glowing branches. He realized the greatest chapter of his journey had never been about finding the past. It had always been about helping others discover a brighter future. As the sun disappeared beyond the hills, the leaves of the young tree shimmered gently in the evening light, carrying countless untold stories toward tomorrow. Autumn arrived quietly in Ashwood. The maple trees turned brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold, covering the streets with colorful leaves that crunched softly beneath every step. The cool air carried the comforting scent of cinnamon, pine, and wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Walter had grown fond of the season. Every afternoon, he carried his notebook to the memory garden, where the young tree had become strong enough to cast a circle of gentle shade across the grass. Children now called it the story tree. They gathered beneath its branches after school, each bringing a favorite story to read aloud. Some stories were funny. Others were adventurous. A few were sad, but every one ended with hope. Walter never interrupted. He simply listened. One afternoon, a shy little boy approached him with a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," the boy whispered. Walter unfolded the page. It was only a few paragraphs long, telling the story of a lonely fox who believed he had no friends until he discovered that kindness could be found in unexpected places. Walter smiled warmly. "This is wonderful." The boy looked surprised. "It is?" "It is," Walter replied. "Because it came from your heart." The boy's face lit up with pride. Nearby, Eleanor watched the moment with quiet happiness. "You've become exactly what Emma hoped for," she said. Walter looked toward the story tree. "I still miss them." "I know," Eleanor answered gently. "But missing someone isn't the opposite of love." Walter looked at her. "It's proof that love is still with us." A peaceful silence settled over the garden. The golden leaves above them fluttered softly in the breeze. Suddenly, one leaf drifted down and landed inside Walter's notebook. Unlike the others, it shimmered faintly. Written across it in delicate silver letters were 3 simple words. "Keep them dreaming." Walter closed the notebook carefully. He smiled toward the children laughing beneath the story tree. The promise made long ago beside a quiet lake had become something far greater than memory. It had become a tradition. Every evening in Ashwood, another child would fall asleep with a gentle story. Every morning, another storyteller would wake inspired to write one. And somewhere beyond the whispering pines, Emma, Henry, and Samuel would surely be smiling, knowing that their promise continued to grow, one peaceful bedtime story at a time. Winter arrived gently in Ashwood, covering the rooftops, pine trees, and quiet streets with a blanket of fresh white snow. The town seemed to move more slowly, wrapped in peaceful silence. Smoke curled from chimneys, and warm lights glowed behind frosted windows as evening settled over the valley. Walter loved winter evenings. They reminded him that even the coldest seasons could feel warm when stories were shared. Every Friday night, families gathered in the old library for the story circle. The room was decorated with evergreen branches, handmade paper snowflakes, and rows of glowing candles that filled the air with a soft golden light. Children hurried inside wearing colorful scarves and wool hats, carrying books tucked beneath their arms. Walter sat in his favorite chair near the fireplace. Instead of reading from his notebook that evening, he closed it and smiled. "I think," he said softly, "tonight someone else should tell the story." The room became quiet. Then the shy little boy from the memory garden slowly raised his hand. "I'd like to try." Walter nodded encouragingly. The boy stepped forward and unfolded the paper he had written weeks before. His voice trembled at first, but as he continued, confidence slowly replaced fear. He told the story of the lonely fox who discovered that kindness always finds its way home. When he finished, the room filled with gentle applause. Walter noticed tears shining in the eyes of several parents. Not because the story was sad, because it was full of hope. After everyone left, the librarian handed Walter a small wooden plaque. Across the front were carefully carved words. "For the first keeper of stories." Walter held it quietly. "This belongs to all of us," he said. The librarian smiled. "Perhaps. But someone had to begin." Later that night, Walter walked home through softly falling snow with Rusty trotting happily beside him. As they passed the town square, he noticed the story box beneath the old oak tree. It was overflowing. Hundreds of handwritten stories now filled the wooden box. Walter gently placed one more page inside. Then he looked up at the snowy sky. Large flakes drifted silently through the glow of the streetlights. For a brief moment, he imagined Emma, Henry, and Samuel standing beside him once again. Not as memories, but as quiet companions carried forever within every story that continued to warm the hearts of those who listened before falling peacefully asleep. Spring arrived quietly after the long winter. Snow melted into clear streams that wandered through Whispering Pines forest, and fresh green leaves returned to the trees. Colorful wildflowers appeared beside every path, filling the air with the sweet scent of new beginnings. Walter stood in his garden one peaceful morning, watching birds build nests in the branches above. Rusty rested nearby, enjoying the warm sunshine. The old golden retriever had grown slower over the past few months, but his bright eyes still sparkled with the same loyal kindness. Walter gently scratched behind Rusty's ears. "You've walked every step of this journey with me," he whispered. Rusty wagged his tail softly. That afternoon, Walter visited the memory garden. The story tree had grown taller than ever, its branches spreading wide enough to shelter dozens of children beneath its shade. Families had begun hanging tiny wooden ornaments from its branches. Each ornament carried the title of a favorite bedtime story. When the breeze blew through the leaves, the ornaments touched one another with a gentle wooden chime that sounded almost like distant music. Eleanor joined Walter beneath the tree. "It has become more beautiful than I ever imagined," she said. Walter looked around. Children were reading aloud, grandparents were sharing old memories, and parents sat quietly beside them, smiling as they listened. "This isn't just a garden anymore," Walter said. "It's a home for stories." Eleanor nodded. "And every home needs a tradition." She handed Walter a small bronze bell. "Every spring, ring this bell to begin the festival of stories." That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the entire town gathered beneath the story tree. Walter gently rang the little bell. Its clear, peaceful sound echoed through the garden. The crowd fell silent. Then, one by one, children, parents, teachers, and grandparents began reading their favorite stories aloud. Laughter mixed with happy tears. Hope mixed with memories. And a star slowly appeared above Ashwood once again. Walter looked toward the glowing branches of the story tree. He realized that stories, like trees, became stronger with every season. The more they were shared, the deeper their roots reached into the hearts of everyone who listened. The Festival of Stories became a cherished tradition in Ashwood. Each spring, people traveled from nearby towns to gather beneath the story tree. Some came with books that had been passed down through generations. Others carried handwritten pages folded carefully in their pockets, hoping to share a story for the very first time. Walter welcomed every visitor with the same warm smile. "There is always room for one more story," he would say. One bright afternoon, a young woman arrived carrying an old leather suitcase. She introduced herself as Claire and explained that she had recently inherited the belongings of her grandfather, who had grown up in Ashwood many decades earlier. "I found something that belongs here," she said. From the suitcase, she carefully removed a small wooden lantern. Unlike the glowing lanterns Walter had discovered beneath the forest, this one was simple and handcrafted. Carved into its side was a familiar pine tree, along with a single date. Summer 1984. Walter's eyes widened. He gently opened the lantern. Inside was a rolled piece of paper tied with a faded blue ribbon. Everyone gathered quietly as Walter untied it. The paper contained a list of names. Dozens of them. Each name belonged to someone who had once visited the campfire where Emma, Henry, Samuel, and Walter had shared their stories. At the bottom, Emma had written, "A story grows stronger every time it welcomes someone new." Walter looked around at the smiling faces beneath the story tree. Children, parents, grandparents, visitors, friends. Some had traveled many miles to be there, yet they all felt like family. Without saying a word, Walter picked up a pen and added one final line beneath Emma's message. "The circle is still growing." Everyone applauded softly. Claire placed the lantern beneath the story tree, where it caught the afternoon sunlight and glowed warmly. As evening settled over Ashwood, the lantern remained there, welcoming every visitor with its quiet reminder that stories are never meant to belong to just one person. They are gifts, passed gently from one heart to another, carrying kindness, comfort, and hope farther than anyone could ever imagine. Summer returned to Ashwood with long, peaceful evenings and skies painted in soft shades of orange and pink. The story tree stood proudly in the center of the memory garden, its branches now so wide that they sheltered nearly the entire gathering during the Festival of Stories. One warm evening, Walter noticed something new. Children had begun leaving small handwritten notes beneath the tree. Some were folded into tiny paper stars. Others were tucked inside glass jars hanging from the lower branches. Curious, Walter picked up one of the notes. "Dear Story Tree," it read, "Thank you for helping me be brave on my first day of school." Another said, "I read a story to my little sister every night. She falls asleep smiling." A third simply read, "I don't feel lonely anymore." Walter's eyes filled with quiet emotion. He realized the tree had become more than a symbol. It had become a silent friend to everyone who visited. Later that evening, Eleanor joined him beneath its branches carrying a beautifully carved wooden box. "I think it's time," she said. Walter opened the lid. Inside were hundreds of tiny blank paper leaves. "What are these for?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "Every visitor may write one dream, one hope, or one act of kindness they wish to share with the world." Together they placed the box beside the story tree. By sunset, dozens of children and adults had already filled out the little paper leaves. Some promised to help a neighbor. Some hoped to become teachers, artists, or firefighters. Others simply wrote, "I want to make someone smile." Walter watched as the paper leaves fluttered gently in the warm breeze. Each one represented a future that had not yet been written. As darkness settled over the garden, families lit small lanterns and placed them around the story tree. Their golden light danced across the handwritten dreams. Walter looked toward the stars. He imagined Emma, Henry, and Samuel reading every tiny paper leaf with proud smiles. The promise they had made years ago had grown far beyond memories. Now it was inspiring dreams. And Walter knew that as long as people continued sharing stories with open hearts, those dreams would never stop growing, just like the story tree reaching faithfully toward the endless summer sky. The days grew warmer, and the story tree became the heart of Ashwood. Every evening, people gathered beneath its broad branches, sharing stories as the sun slowly slipped behind the hills. The gentle sound of laughter mixed with birdsong, creating a peaceful rhythm that seemed to belong only to the town. One quiet afternoon, Walter noticed a little girl sitting alone on the old wooden bench near the fountain. She held a closed notebook in her lap but never opened it. Rusty walked over and rested his head against her knee. The girl smiled softly and stroked his golden fur. Walter sat beside her. "That's a beautiful notebook," he said. She looked down. "I've written lots of stories." "Then why don't you share them?" She hesitated before answering. "I'm afraid people won't like them." Walter remained silent for a moment, remembering the first time he had read his own story aloud in the library. Then he gently opened his notebook and showed her the very first page he had ever written. The handwriting was uneven. A few words had been crossed out. Tiny notes filled the margins. "I almost threw this away," Walter admitted. The girl's eyes widened. "You did? I thought it wasn't good enough. What changed your mind?" Walter smiled. "I realized stories don't need to be perfect. They only need to be true." The little girl slowly opened her notebook. On the first page was a story about a lonely cloud that traveled across the sky searching for a place where everyone felt welcome. Walter read it carefully. When he finished, he looked at her with a warm smile. "This story made me feel peaceful." The girl's face brightened. That evening, during the gathering beneath the story tree, she stood before the crowd and read her story aloud. Her voice shook at first. But as she continued, confidence replaced fear. When she finished, the entire garden erupted in gentle applause. The little girl looked toward Walter. He simply nodded. She didn't need any more encouragement. She had already discovered the greatest secret every storyteller eventually learns. A story shared with honesty will always find the heart that needs it most. Above them, the story tree rustled softly in the evening breeze, as though it, too, was applauding the birth of another storyteller. A gentle breeze welcomed the first morning of August. The sunlight filtered through the branches of the story tree, scattering warm patches of light across the memory garden. Dew sparkled on every leaf, and the fountain murmured quietly, as though it were telling its own endless story. Walter arrived early, carrying only his notebook and a small basket of birdseed. Rusty trotted happily beside him, stopping every few steps to greet the squirrels that had become his familiar companions. As Walter scattered the birdseed, dozens of colorful birds gathered around him. Their cheerful songs filled the garden, and children who had come early for the day laughed as tiny sparrows hopped fearlessly across the path. One little boy pointed toward the highest branch of the story tree. "Look!" Everyone looked up. A robin had carefully built a nest among the leaves. 3 tiny blue eggs rested safely inside, hidden beneath soft feathers and small twigs. The children watched in complete silence. Walter smiled. "Stories are a little like nests," he said softly. "They give us a safe place to grow until we're ready to fly." The children nodded thoughtfully. Later that afternoon, the story tree welcomed visitors from neighboring towns. They brought their own favorite bedtime stories, family traditions, and cherished memories. Soon, the garden echoed with voices from many different places, each sharing a unique tale while listening respectfully to others. Eleanor stood beside Walter. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "Hear what?" "The sound of stories becoming a family." Walter closed his eyes. He heard laughter. Gentle applause. Children asking questions. Parents reading aloud. Birds singing overhead. Every sound blended together into something beautiful. As sunset painted the sky with soft shades of amber and rose, Walter added one final sentence to his notebook. The greatest stories are the ones that invite everyone to belong. He closed the notebook and looked around the garden. The story tree had become more than a symbol of friendship. It had become a place where strangers arrived as visitors and left as friends. As evening settled over Ashwood once again, the robin tucked itself gently over its tiny eggs. Walter smiled at the peaceful sight. Just like every new story, every new life needed warmth, patience, and someone willing to believe in its beginning. The first cool breeze of autumn arrived earlier than expected, carrying golden leaves across the peaceful streets of Ashwood. Walter noticed the change as he opened his front door that morning. The air felt crisp, and somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed gently through the valley. Rusty stretched happily before following Walter toward the memory garden. When they arrived, they found dozens of children sitting quietly beneath the story tree. None of them were reading. Instead, they were listening. Perched on one of the lower branches was the robin Walter had seen weeks before. The 3 tiny blue eggs had hatched, and now 3 fluffy chicks peered curiously from the nest. The children watched in complete silence, smiling every time the mother robin returned with food. Walter whispered, "Every story begins small." A little girl beside him asked, "Just like those birds?" Walter nodded. "And just like dreams." The children remained still, careful not to frighten the little family. As the afternoon passed, Walter opened his notebook and invited each child to write a single sentence. Only one sentence. Together, those simple sentences became a brand new story. One child wrote about a curious rabbit. Another added a friendly fox. Someone introduced a quiet river that sang lullabies. Another imagined a mountain where every sunrise painted the clouds with hope. By evening, dozens of small ideas had become one beautiful tale. Walter read it aloud beneath the story tree. Every child smiled when they recognized the sentence they had written. "It belongs to all of us now," Walter said. The children applauded softly. Eleanor, watching from the fountain, smiled with quiet pride. "That," she whispered, "is exactly how kindness grows." Before everyone left, each child tied a small ribbon to one of the lower branches of the story tree. Blue, green, yellow, red, purple. The ribbons danced gently in the evening breeze like tiny wishes floating through the air. As darkness settled over Ashwood, lanterns around the garden began to glow one by one. Walter looked at the colorful ribbons and realized that every person who shared a story left behind something invisible yet lasting. Not just words. Not just memories. But a quiet reminder that when people create something together, it becomes far more beautiful than anything they could have made alone. Rusty rested beside the tree, watching the lanterns shimmer beneath the stars, while another peaceful night wrapped Ashwood in the comforting promise of tomorrow's stories. The weeks passed gently, and the colorful ribbons remained tied to the story tree, fluttering softly with every breeze. Whenever the wind whispered through the branches, the ribbons danced together, creating a quiet melody that children called the Song of Stories. One peaceful afternoon, Walter arrived at the memory garden carrying a small wooden chest. It wasn't old like the mysterious chest beneath the cabin. This one was newly made, polished by hand, and decorated with tiny carvings of pine trees, stars, and open books. The children gathered around him with curious smiles. "What's inside?" one of them asked. Walter carefully opened the lid. The chest was empty. The children looked puzzled. "It's supposed to be empty," Walter said with a smile. "I don't understand," another child replied. Walter reached into his pocket and placed a folded sheet of paper inside. "This chest isn't meant to hold treasures," he explained. "It's meant to hold beginnings." One by one, the children began placing something inside. A drawing of a happy family. A poem about rain. A feather found beside the lake. A pressed flower. A handwritten promise to help a lonely classmate. Soon, the chest was no longer empty. It was filled with little pieces of kindness. Eleanor watched quietly from beneath the story tree. "When will you open it again?" she asked. Walter closed the lid gently. Not today. Not next week. Maybe not even next year. The children looked surprised. Why? Because some treasures become more meaningful with time. The children nodded thoughtfully. Together, they carried the little wooden chest beneath the story tree and buried it carefully beside the fountain. A smooth stone was placed above it. Walter wrote a single sentence on the stone. For the storytellers yet to come. The children stood silently around the little memorial. None of them felt sad. Instead, they felt hopeful. One day, someone they would never meet would discover the chest and find dreams, promises, kindness, and stories left behind by people who believed in sharing hope. As the evening sun bathed the garden in golden light, Walter smiled. He had once searched for hidden treasures buried beneath the forest. Now he understood. The greatest treasures were never gold or jewels. They were the words, dreams, and acts of kindness that people left behind for someone else's tomorrow. The seasons continued to turn, and the story tree stood taller than ever, its branches reaching gracefully toward the sky. Every year it welcomed new storytellers, new listeners, and new dreams. The memory garden had become a place where time seemed to slow, allowing every visitor to pause, breathe, and simply enjoy the quiet beauty around them. One peaceful morning, Walter noticed a young boy sitting beneath the tree with a sketchbook instead of a notebook. The boy wasn't writing. He was drawing. Walter sat beside him. "What are you creating?" he asked. The boy smiled shyly and turned the sketchbook around. It showed the story tree standing beneath a sky full of stars. Around its trunk were children reading, parents smiling, grandparents telling stories, and Rusty lying peacefully at Walter's feet. "It's beautiful," Walter said. "I can't write stories very well," the boy admitted. "So I draw them." Walter nodded warmly. "Stories don't always need words." The boy looked surprised. "They don't?" Walter smiled. "A story can be painted, sung, remembered, photographed, or simply shared through kindness. What matters is the feeling it leaves behind." The boy looked at his drawing with new confidence. That afternoon, Walter had an idea. He invited everyone in Ashwood to bring not only stories, but also paintings, songs, poems, photographs, and handmade crafts inspired by hope and friendship. By sunset, the memory garden had transformed into something magical. Paintings leaned against the fountain. Poems fluttered from ribbons. Photographs hung from wooden frames. Children played gentle melodies on violins and guitars while families listened beneath the story tree. It wasn't only a festival of stories anymore. It had become a celebration of imagination itself. Eleanor quietly joined Walter beneath the branches. "Emma would have loved this," she whispered. Walter smiled toward the glowing leaves above. "I think she already does." A gentle breeze stirred the ribbons, and for just a moment, the leaves shimmered with the same warm golden light Walter had seen on the very first day his journey began. He closed his eyes and listened. The laughter. The music. The quiet conversations. The rustling leaves. Together, they formed the most beautiful story he had ever heard. One that no notebook could ever fully capture. Because it wasn't written on paper. It was written in the hearts of everyone gathered beneath the story tree. The celebration of imagination became one of Ashwood's most beloved traditions. Every season brought new paintings, poems, songs, and stories to the memory garden. Visitors no longer came only to listen. They came to create. One quiet evening, Walter arrived earlier than usual. The garden was empty. The story tree stood peacefully beneath a sky painted with soft shades of pink and orange. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the fountain whispered quietly in the fading light. Walter sat alone on the old wooden bench. For the first time in many months, he simply watched the sunset without opening his notebook. Rusty rested beside him, his silver muzzle glowing in the warm evening light. After a long silence, Walter spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder what they'll remember about us?" Rusty lifted his head and wagged his tail gently. Walter smiled. I hope they remember how peaceful it felt here. Just then, footsteps approached. It was Eleanor. She carried a small glass jar with a cork lid. Inside were dozens of tiny folded papers. I've been collecting these, she said. Walter opened the jar. Each paper contained an answer to the same question. What makes you feel at home? One child had written. Listening to my dad read before bed. Another answered. Grandma's warm hugs. Someone else wrote. Rain tapping on the roof while everyone is safe inside. A teenager simply wrote. Knowing someone believes in me. Walter quietly read every message. When he reached the final paper, he paused. It read. The story tree reminds me that no one has to face life alone. He carefully folded the note and placed it back into the jar. These, Walter whispered, may be the most beautiful stories yet. Eleanor nodded. Because they're true. As darkness settled over Ashwood, Walter buried the little glass jar beneath the story tree beside the wooden chest they had hidden months before. Not as something to forget, but as a gift for whoever might discover it many years from now. The stars slowly appeared overhead. Walter looked up and smiled. Some treasures were meant to be found immediately. Others became more meaningful because they waited patiently for the right heart to uncover them. And somewhere, carried gently by the evening wind, another story was already searching for the person who needed it most. Years passed gently in Ashwood, yet the memory garden never lost its quiet magic. The story tree had become enormous, its branches stretching like welcoming arms over the winding paths below. Children who had once sat beneath its shade now returned as adults, bringing their own sons and daughters to hear bedtime stories beneath the rustling leaves. Walter's hair had turned completely white, and his steps had become slower, but his smile remained unchanged. Every evening, he still carried his notebook to the garden, though now he spent more time listening than speaking. One peaceful afternoon, a familiar young woman approached him. It was the little girl who had once delivered muffins to his porch many years earlier. She was grown now. In her hands she carried a finished book. Its cover showed a great tree standing beneath a sky full of stars. She handed it to Walter. I finally finished it. Walter carefully opened the first page. The dedication read, For the man who taught me that stories don't have to be perfect. They only have to be honest. His eyes filled with quiet tears. You became a storyteller, he whispered. She smiled. You believed I could. That evening, the entire town gathered beneath the story tree for a very special celebration. Instead of Walter reading aloud, the young woman stood before the crowd. She opened her book and began telling a gentle bedtime story. Children leaned against their parents. Grandparents closed their eyes and smiled. Even the birds seemed to grow quiet, as if listening. Walter sat beneath the tree with Rusty resting beside him. He realized something beautiful. The promise no longer depended on him. It was alive in countless voices now. When the story ended, the crowd applauded warmly. The young woman walked back to Walter and handed him a fountain pen. I think this belongs to you. Walter shook his head with a gentle smile. No. He placed the pen back into her hand. It's your turn now. Above them, the leaves of the story tree shimmered softly in the evening breeze. Walter looked toward the stars. Somewhere beyond them, he imagined Emma, Henry, and Samuel smiling with quiet pride. The promise they had made so many years ago had finally become exactly what they had dreamed of. Not one storyteller, but generations of them. Each carrying hope forward, one peaceful bedtime story at a time. The years continued to pass like gentle pages turning in a well-loved book. Ashwood changed with every season, but one thing never changed, the peaceful gathering beneath the story tree every evening. Walter no longer walked as quickly as he once had. His cane tapped softly along the stone paths of the memory garden, while Rusty, now gray around his face, stayed faithfully by his side. They moved slowly together, never in a hurry. One crisp autumn morning, Walter noticed something that made him stop. The tiny sapling planted years ago had become the tallest tree in the garden. Its trunk was wide and strong. Its branches stretched high into the sky. Hundreds of colorful ribbons still fluttered among the leaves, joined by thousands of handwritten wishes, drawings, poems, and tiny wooden ornaments collected over the years. The story tree had become a living history of Ashwood. A group of children ran toward Walter. "Mr. Bennett," one of them called. "We have something to show you." They led him to a newly carved wooden sign standing at the entrance of the memory garden. Walter read the words slowly. "Welcome to the story garden. Every story shared here becomes someone's hope." Walter smiled quietly. "No one told me about this." "We wanted it to be a surprise," the children replied. Nearby, the grown storyteller who had once been the little girl with the muffin basket smiled proudly. "This place belongs to everyone now." Walter looked around. Families were reading together beneath the tree. Artists painted peaceful landscapes. Musicians played soft melodies. Children laughed as they traded handwritten stories. No one hurried. No one felt alone. Everything Emma had once imagined had become real. Walter walked to the center of the garden and gently placed his old leather notebook at the foot of the story tree. Its pages were worn. Its corners were faded. But it was full. Every page carried memories, kindness, hope, and promises. He rested his hand on the cover for a moment. Then he quietly stepped away. The notebook no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to every person who would one day open it, read its pages, and discover that even the smallest story could brighten someone's darkest night. As the evening sun painted the sky with golden light, the leaves above whispered softly in the breeze. Walter closed his eyes. The sound reminded him of that very first rainy evening, when a mysterious wooden box had appeared on his doorstep and changed his life forever. He opened his eyes with a grateful smile. Some journeys never truly end. They simply become someone else's beginning. The morning after Walter placed his notebook beneath the story tree, he returned to the garden expecting to find it exactly where he had left it. Instead, the notebook was gone. For a brief moment, he felt surprised. Then he noticed a small handwritten card resting against the tree's trunk. It simply said, "Thank you. The stories are still traveling." Walter smiled. He wasn't worried. That notebook had never been meant to stay in one place forever. As he looked around the garden, he noticed something wonderful. Several children were sitting beneath different trees, each holding notebooks of their own. Some were writing quietly. Others were reading aloud to younger brothers, sisters, or friends. The stories had already begun to grow beyond his own. Rusty lay peacefully nearby, watching butterflies drift through the flowers. Walter sat beside him. "You see, old friend," he whispered, "they don't need us to remind them anymore." Rusty gently wagged his tail. Just then, the grown storyteller approached carrying Walter's old notebook. "It wasn't stolen," she said with a smile. "We passed it from family to family last night." Walter opened the notebook. Between almost every page were small notes written in different handwriting. "This story helped my son sleep after a difficult day. My grandmother read this to me when I was afraid of thunderstorms. Now I'm reading it to my own daughter. Thank you for reminding us that kindness always finds its way home." Walter quietly turned each page. The notebook no longer contained only his words. It had become filled with hundreds of memories from people whose lives had been touched by the stories. He looked toward the story tree. Its leaves shimmered softly in the afternoon sunlight. For a brief instant, the warm breeze carried familiar laughter. Emma, Henry, Samuel. Not as ghosts. Not as echoes. But as memories living peacefully inside every act of kindness inspired by their promise. Walter closed the notebook and handed it back. "It belongs in the library now," he said. so anyone can borrow it. The storyteller nodded. That evening, the notebook was placed on a special wooden shelf inside the Ashwood library. Above it hung a simple sign. Take this book home. Read one story. Then share one of your own. Walter smiled as families gathered around the shelf. The circle that had begun with 4 young friends beside a quiet lake had become endless. And somewhere, another child was opening the notebook for the very first time. A few weeks after Walter's notebook found its new home in the Ashwood library, something unexpected began to happen. Every Monday morning, the notebook would appear on the library shelf with one new page inside. No one ever saw who added it. The librarian checked the security cameras. Nothing unusual appeared. The notebook simply seemed to gain another story overnight. Soon, the mystery became part of Ashwood's charm. Children rushed to the library every Monday, eager to discover the newest page. Some believed the story tree wrote the stories. Others insisted the friendly robins carried them during the night. A few smiled and whispered that perhaps Emma was still keeping her promise. Walter never tried to solve the mystery. Instead, he visited every Monday morning, borrowed the notebook, and read the newest page beneath the story tree. Each story was gentle. Each one spoke of hope, friendship, forgiveness, or quiet courage. None were signed. One cool autumn morning, Walter opened to the newest page. It read, "If you ever feel alone, sit beneath a tree, listen to the wind, and remember that somewhere, someone once wished for your happiness, even if they never met you." Walter closed his eyes. The breeze moved softly through the branches above. The leaves whispered exactly as they had on the day he first discovered the memory garden. When he opened his eyes again, dozens of children had quietly gathered around him. "Will you read it to us?" one little girl asked. Walter smiled warmly. "I'd be honored." He read every word slowly. No one interrupted. When the story ended, the children remained silent for a moment. Then one little boy quietly reached over and held another child's hand. No one had asked him to. He simply did. Walter watched the small gesture and smiled. Sometimes the greatest stories weren't the ones written on paper. Sometimes they were written through simple acts of kindness. As the children skipped happily through the garden, Walter looked up into the branches of the story tree. A single golden leaf drifted gently into his lap. Across its surface, glowing softly in the afternoon sunlight, appeared familiar words. "The story is still growing." Walter folded the leaf carefully inside his pocket. Some mysteries, he realized, were never meant to be explained. They were simply meant to remind people that hope has a quiet way of finding those who need it most. Winter returned once again, covering Ashwood with a blanket of fresh snow. The story garden looked almost magical beneath the white branches, while the story tree stood proudly in the center, its colorful ribbons peeking through the snow like tiny memories refusing to fade. Walter wrapped his scarf tightly around his neck and walked slowly through the garden with Rusty beside him. Their footprints were the first to mark the untouched snow that morning. The world was wonderfully quiet. Even the fountain had frozen into delicate patterns of crystal. Walter sat on the old wooden bench, listening to the peaceful silence. After a few minutes, he noticed something unusual. A little bird landed on the branch above him. Then another. And another. Within moments, dozens of robins, sparrows, and cardinals rested throughout the story tree, filling its snowy branches with gentle colors. They did not sing. They simply stayed together. Walter smiled. "It must be cold," he whispered. That afternoon, children arrived carrying small bags of birdseed. Without being asked, they spread the seeds around the garden and filled little wooden feeders hanging from the branches. The birds fluttered happily from branch to branch. One little girl looked up at Walter. "My teacher says kindness is something we do." Walter nodded. "She's right." The girl smiled. "I think birds can read kindness even if they can't read stories." Walter laughed softly. "I think you're right." As evening approached, the children gathered beneath the story tree with warm blankets and steaming mugs of hot chocolate. Instead of reading that night, everyone simply sat together watching snowflakes fall through the lantern light. No one hurried to speak. No one reached for a phone or a clock. The silence itself became the story. Walter looked around at the peaceful faces glowing in the warm light. He realized that not every meaningful story needed words. Sometimes comfort was found in sharing a quiet moment with people who cared about one another. As the first stars appeared through the snowy clouds, the story tree sparkled beneath its blanket of white. Walter gently closed his eyes. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the familiar feeling that had begun this extraordinary journey long ago. A feeling that every peaceful heart understands. Home is not only a place. It is the warmth we create for one another, even on the coldest winter night. Summer arrived with long golden evenings, and the story garden glowed with life. Wildflowers danced in the warm breeze, butterflies drifted lazily between blossoms, and the story tree cast a wide circle of cool shade where families gathered every day. Walter and Rusty followed their familiar path through the garden. It had become a place where every face felt familiar, even when visitors were new. People greeted one another like old friends, connected by stories they had never shared before meeting. Near the center of the garden stood a large wooden table. On it rested hundreds of blank postcards. A small sign read, "Write a letter to someone you may never meet." Walter paused. He picked up one of the cards and smiled. Around him, children, parents, grandparents, and travelers quietly began writing. Some wrote to future grandchildren. Some wrote to people who might be feeling lonely. Others wrote to anyone who needed hope. Walter slowly wrote his own letter. "Dear friend, if these words have found you, I hope you know that difficult days never last forever. Be patient with yourself. Look for small moments of beauty, a bird singing at sunrise, rain on the window, or someone offering a kind smile. The world becomes brighter every time you choose kindness, even when no one notices. And whenever life feels heavy, remember this. Every story has another page waiting to be written." Asterisk. He folded the letter and placed it into a wooden mailbox beside the table. By sunset, the mailbox was overflowing. Eleanor smiled as she locked it. "Where will they go?" Walter asked. "Every year," she replied, "we'll send them to libraries, schools, hospitals, and community centers across the country." Walter imagined strangers opening those letters months later. Perhaps someone would read one after a difficult day. Perhaps a child would keep one inside a favorite book. Perhaps a family would read one together before bedtime. The thought filled him with quiet joy. As evening settled over Ashwood, the story tree shimmered beneath strings of tiny lanterns. Walter looked around at the smiling faces gathered beneath its branches. The promise that had once belonged to 4 friends beside a peaceful lake had now traveled farther than any of them could have dreamed. Not through magic. Not through fame. But through simple words, shared with open hearts. And somewhere, far beyond Ashwood, another story was already beginning because one letter had reminded someone to keep believing in tomorrow. Autumn returned once more, painting Ashwood in warm shades of amber, crimson, and gold. Every path through the story garden was covered with crisp leaves that whispered beneath gentle footsteps. The air carried the comforting scent of cinnamon, pine, and freshly baked apple pie from the little bakery on Main Street. Walter had grown older, but he still visited the story tree every morning with Rusty faithfully by his side. As they entered the garden, Walter noticed something unusual. Dozens of small glass bottles hung from the lower branches of the story tree. Each bottle contained a tiny rolled piece of paper tied with colorful thread. A handwritten sign rested nearby. "Messages for tomorrow." Children gathered around the tree, excited to explain. "We wrote notes for people who will visit years from now," one little girl said. Walter carefully opened one bottle. Inside, a child had written, "If today feels hard, don't give up. Someone is cheering for you, even if you've never met them." He smiled and opened another. Remember to look up at the stars tonight. They make every dream feel a little closer. A third message read, I hope you laughed today. If not, tomorrow is another chance. Walter gently returned the notes to their bottles. They're beautiful, he said. They're little lights for the future. That afternoon, visitors from many different places wandered through the story garden. Each person chose one bottle. They read the message inside, smiled quietly, and then replaced it with a new note of their own before hanging it back on the tree. By evening, every bottle held fresh words of hope. The story tree had become a living conversation between strangers separated by time. Eleanor stood beside Walter as lanterns flickered to life beneath the branches. It keeps changing, she whispered. Walter nodded. Because kindness is never finished. As darkness settled over Ashwood, the glass bottles reflected the warm lantern light, sparkling like tiny stars hanging from the ancient branches. Walter looked upward. Long ago, he had searched for hidden treasures buried beneath the forest floor. Now he understood. The greatest treasures were never hidden underground. They were hidden inside ordinary people willing to leave behind a few gentle words for someone they would never meet. And somewhere in the future, another traveler would open one of those little bottles and discover exactly the hope they needed on that quiet autumn evening. Winter arrived softly, covering Ashwood in a peaceful blanket of snow once again. The story garden looked quieter than ever, yet it was never empty. Every evening, warm lanterns glowed beneath the story tree, welcoming anyone who wished to escape the cold for a little while. Walter walked slowly through the snow with Rusty at his side. Their footprints stretched behind them like gentle reminders of all the journeys they had taken together. When they reached the story tree, they found something unexpected. A long wooden table had been placed beneath its branches. It held no books. No notebooks. No letters. Only empty chairs. A small sign rested in the center. Sit with someone new. Walter smiled. Throughout the afternoon, strangers quietly took their seats. A retired teacher shared tea with a young college student. A lonely traveler spoke with a local baker. A child proudly showed her drawings to an elderly couple. No one rushed the conversations. They simply listened. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they sat together in comfortable silence. Walter joined a young man who had recently moved to Ashwood. I don't know anyone here, the man admitted. Walter poured him a cup of hot cider. You do now. The young man smiled. For over an hour they talked about simple things, favorite books, peaceful places, childhood memories, and dreams for the future. When they finally stood to leave, the young man thanked Walter. I came here feeling like a stranger. Walter gently placed a hand on his shoulder. And now? The man looked around at the smiling faces beneath the lanterns. It feels like home. As evening settled over the garden, Eleanor rang the small bronze bell that had first welcomed the Festival of Stories years before. The gentle sound echoed through the snowy air. Everyone stood together beneath the story tree. No speeches were given. No ceremony followed. Instead, each person simply wished the person beside them a peaceful night. Walter watched the quiet exchange of smiles and warm handshakes. He realized that the story garden had become more than a place for stories. It had become a place where loneliness quietly disappeared. As snowflakes drifted through the lantern light, Walter looked up into the branches of the story tree. The ribbons, lanterns, messages, and ornaments all moved gently in the winter breeze. Together, they seemed to whisper the same timeless promise. No matter where your journey begins, there will always be a place where your story is welcome. The first signs of spring appeared almost unnoticed. Tiny green buds emerged along the branches of the story tree, birds returned with cheerful songs, and the snow slowly disappeared into sparkling streams that wound through the story garden. The air smelled of fresh earth, blooming flowers, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. Walter and Rusty followed their familiar path beneath the trees. Though Walter's steps had grown slower, His eyes still carried the same gentle curiosity that had led him into Whispering Pines Forest so many years ago. As they reached the story tree, Walter noticed a young family standing nearby. A mother and father were helping their little daughter hang a small wooden swing from one of the lower branches. The girl looked at Walter nervously. "We asked if it was okay," she said. "Everyone said the story tree belongs to all of us." Walter smiled warmly. "Then it should carry laughter as well as stories." The little girl climbed onto the swing. Her parents gave her a gentle push. She laughed as she floated back and forth beneath the great branches, her joyful voice filling the garden. Soon other children gathered, taking turns on the swing while parents smiled from nearby benches. The story garden echoed with happiness. Eleanor walked over carrying a wooden plaque. She placed it beside the swing. It read, "May every child who swings here imagine a brighter tomorrow." Walter traced the carved letters with his fingertips. "It's perfect," he whispered. That afternoon, children began a new tradition. Before leaving the garden, each child gave the swing one gentle push, even if no one was sitting on it. When Walter asked why, a little boy answered with a grin. "So the next dream is already moving." Walter chuckled softly. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the empty swing moved gently in the evening breeze. It seemed almost alive, carrying invisible dreams back and forth beneath the story tree. Walter watched it for a long time. He realized that hope worked much the same way. Sometimes we set it in motion for someone we may never meet. And long after we are gone, it continues moving forward, carrying another heart toward brighter days. As twilight settled over Ashwood, the swing slowed to a peaceful stop beneath the whispering branches. But the dreams it had carried continued traveling far beyond the garden, just as every beautiful story always does. Summer arrived with gentle warmth, and the story garden welcomed another season of laughter. The story tree was now so large that its branches shaded nearly the entire garden. Birds nested high among its leaves, butterflies drifted through the flowers below, and the wooden swing became a favorite place for children every afternoon. Walter visited early one morning before anyone else had arrived. Rusty walked slowly beside him, his steps careful but steady. The garden was wonderfully quiet. Walter sat beneath the story tree and watched the sunrise paint the sky with soft shades of pink, gold, and pale blue. As the first rays of sunlight reached the highest branches, something remarkable happened. Thousands of tiny drops of morning dew caught the light at once. For a brief moment, the entire tree sparkled like it was covered with countless little stars. Walter smiled. "It looks like the sky came down to visit us." Rusty looked up, wagging his tail softly. Later that morning, children rushed into the garden and stopped in amazement. "It's glowing," one little girl whispered. Eleanor laughed gently. "It always has. We're just awake early enough to notice today." The children sat quietly beneath the shimmering branches, watching the dew slowly disappear as the morning grew warmer. Walter opened his notebook one more time. He wrote, "The most beautiful moments are often the quiet ones that disappear before most people notice them." He closed the notebook and slipped it into his bag. Instead of reading aloud, he invited everyone to spend the next 10 minutes in complete silence. No talking. No reading. No rushing. Only listening. The children heard birds greeting the morning. Parents noticed the wind moving through the leaves. Someone smiled at the distant sound of church bells. Another listened to the gentle splash of the fountain. When the quiet time ended, no one wanted to speak immediately. The silence itself had become a peaceful memory. Walter looked around the garden. Every smiling face reminded him that life wasn't only made meaningful by grand adventures. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrived quietly, like morning dew sparkling for only a few precious minutes. As the sun climbed higher into the summer sky, the last drops disappeared from the leaves. But everyone who had witnessed them carried their beauty home inside their hearts. And the story tree continued standing peacefully, ready to reveal another quiet miracle to anyone willing to slow down and truly see it. The seasons continued their quiet dance, and another autumn gently settled over Ashwood. The story garden glowed beneath a canopy of amber, crimson, and golden leaves. Every evening, families still gathered beneath the story tree, but now many of the storytellers were children who had grown into competent young adults. Walter watched them with quiet pride. He rarely needed to read anymore. The stories had found countless new voices. One peaceful afternoon, the librarian hurried into the garden carrying a large wooden crate. Everyone gathered around as she carefully lifted the lid. Inside were books. Dozens of them. Each book had been written by someone who had once shared a story beneath the story tree. Some were picture books for children. Some were collections of bedtime stories. Others were novels inspired by hope, friendship, and kindness. The librarian smiled. We thought they should all have a home together. The townspeople spent the afternoon building a beautiful little bookshelf beside the story tree. It was painted white with blue trim, and across the top, carved by hand, were the words, "The Little Library of Hope." Before sunset, every book had found its place on the shelves. There was only one rule. Anyone could borrow a book. Anyone could leave one behind. Walter slowly walked to the shelf and ran his fingers across the worn spines. He recognized many names. Some belonged to children he had once encouraged. Others belonged to visitors who had only stayed in Ashwood for a single summer. Yet every book carried the same gentle purpose: to help someone end the day with peace. A young boy carefully selected a bedtime story and hugged it tightly against his chest. "I'm going to read this to my little sister tonight," he said. Walter smiled. "I think she'll sleep very well." As evening arrived, lanterns flickered beneath the story tree. The little library stood quietly beside it, waiting for the next reader. Walter looked around the garden and realized that stories no longer needed to search for people. People now came searching for stories. And every book placed upon those simple wooden shelves carried a little piece of Ashwood into homes far beyond the valley. The story tree rustled softly above them, as though turning the page to yet another beautiful chapter that was only just beginning. Winter returned with gentle snowfall, covering Ashwood in quiet white. The story garden looked as peaceful as ever, and the story tree stood proudly beneath a blanket of snow. Tiny lanterns hanging from its branches glowed warmly each evening, guiding visitors through the silent paths. Walter had grown slower still, but every morning he made the familiar walk with Rusty. They never missed a day. One snowy afternoon, Walter found a group of children gathered around the little library of hope. They looked worried. "The shelves are almost empty," one little girl said. Walter smiled. "That isn't something to worry about." "It isn't?" He shook his head. "It means the stories are being read." The children looked at one another and smiled. That evening, families from all over Ashwood arrived carrying books from their own homes. Some were old fairy tales. Some were family journals. Some were handwritten collections of bedtime stories passed down through generations. One by one, they placed them on the library shelves. Soon, the little library of hope was full again. But something unexpected happened. People didn't stop bringing books. They kept arriving. By the end of the evening, there were far more books than the little library could hold. The town carpenter stepped forward. "I think," he said with a grin, "our little library has grown up." Everyone laughed. Throughout the following week, volunteers worked together to build a larger wooden library beside the story tree. It had wide windows, cozy reading benches, and a fireplace where families could gather on cold winter nights. Above its entrance hung a beautifully carved sign: "The House of Stories." When the doors opened for the first time, children rushed inside with shining eyes. Parents settled into comfortable chairs. Grandparents quietly read aloud beside the fireplace. Outside, snowflakes drifted peacefully around the story tree. Walter stood in the doorway and watched. Years ago, everything had begun with one mysterious wooden box and 4 childhood friends. Now an entire house had been built from nothing more than stories, kindness, and hope. Rusty rested beside the warm fireplace with a contented sigh. Walter smiled. Buildings are made from wood and stone. But homes are built from the stories shared inside them. As the fire crackled softly into the evening, another peaceful chapter began within the warm walls of the House of Stories. Spring returned to Ashwood once again, and with it came fresh blossoms, singing birds, and gentle breezes that carried the sweet scent of wildflowers through the story garden. The House of Stories had quickly become the heart of the town, welcoming visitors from sunrise until long after the evening stars appeared. Every morning, Walter unlocked its wooden doors. He always arrived before anyone else. He lit the fireplace on cool mornings, opened the windows when the weather was warm, and placed a single fresh flower on the reading table. It was his quiet way of saying, "Welcome." One peaceful afternoon, a school bus stopped outside the garden. Children from another town stepped out, holding notebooks and sketchbooks with excitement shining in their eyes. Their teacher approached Walter. "We've heard about this place for years," she said. "We wanted our students to see that stories can bring people together." Walter welcomed them inside. Instead of giving them a tour, he handed each child a blank bookmark made from smooth maple wood. "I have only one request," he said. "Before you leave today, write one sentence you'll never forget." The children spread throughout the garden. Some sat beneath the story tree. Others found quiet corners beside the fountain or wandered among the blooming flowers. An hour later, they returned. One by one, they read their sentences aloud. "Kindness is a language everyone understands. Hope grows when it is shared. Every stranger can become a friend. The best bedtime stories leave the heart peaceful." Walter listened with quiet pride. When every bookmark had been read, the children hung them from a small wooden display inside the House of Stories. Soon, hundreds of bookmarks swayed gently in the breeze flowing through the open windows. Each carried a different thought. Each reflected a different heart. Before boarding the bus, one little girl hugged Walter. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. She smiled. "For giving stories a home." As the bus disappeared down the winding road, Walter looked toward the story tree. Its branches danced softly in the afternoon wind. He realized something beautiful. People no longer traveled to Ashwood because of a mysterious legend. They came because they wanted to carry a little more kindness back into their own communities. And perhaps that was the greatest story of all. One peaceful town inspiring countless others to write their own chapters of hope, one gentle act at a time. Summer returned once again, bathing Ashwood in warm golden light. The story garden was more beautiful than ever. Roses climbed the white fences, birds nested peacefully in the story tree, and the House of Stories welcomed visitors from every corner of the country. Walter now spent most of his mornings sitting on the wide front porch of the House of Stories with Rusty curled peacefully beside him. He no longer hurried to write. Instead, he watched. He watched children race toward the story tree with books tucked beneath their arms. He watched grandparents reading softly to their grandchildren. He watched strangers arrive quietly and leave smiling. One afternoon, a young journalist visited Ashwood. She carried a small camera and a notebook. "I've traveled across the country," she told Walter, "looking for places that remind people how to be kind." Walter smiled. "I hope you found one." She spent the day speaking with visitors. No one talked about becoming famous. No one spoke about money. Instead, they shared simple moments. A father reading to his daughter before bedtime. A lonely traveler finding friendship beneath the story tree. A child discovering the courage to tell their very first story. That evening, before leaving, the journalist asked Walter one final question. "If people remember only one thing about this place 100 years from now, what do you hope it will be?" Walter looked toward the story tree, its leaves glowing softly in the evening sun. He answered without hesitation. "I hope they remember how this place made them feel." The journalist quietly wrote down every word. Several weeks later, her article was published. People from distant towns and cities began visiting Ashwood, not because it was famous, but because they longed for the same feeling they had read about. Peace. Belonging. Hope. Soon, visitors began taking those ideas back to their own hometowns. Small reading circles appeared. Little libraries were built. Community gardens welcomed storytellers. Acts of quiet kindness spread from neighborhood to neighborhood. Walter smiled as letters arrived describing these new places. The story tree had never truly belonged to Ashwood alone. Its roots had quietly reached far beyond the valley. Not through branches, but through hearts. And as another golden sunset settled over the story garden, Walter realized that the greatest stories are never measured by how many people read them. They are measured by how many lives they gently inspire to become stories of kindness themselves. Autumn returned with its familiar colors, wrapping Ashwood in brilliant shades of gold, crimson, and copper. The story garden had become a place known far beyond the valley, yet it never lost its quiet spirit. No matter how many visitors arrived, there was always room for one more story, one more smile, and one more friend. Walter walked slowly through the garden with Rusty beside him. The old golden retriever moved carefully now, but his faithful eyes still sparkled with gentle warmth. As they reached the story tree, Walter noticed something extraordinary. A circle of children had gathered beneath its branches. They weren't waiting for an adult to begin. Instead, they had organized the evening themselves. One child welcomed everyone. Another handed out books. A third lit the lanterns hanging from the lower branches. The youngest children found comfortable places on soft blankets while older ones prepared to read aloud. Walter quietly sat on a nearby bench. He never interrupted. The first storyteller was a little girl who read about a tiny star that believed it wasn't bright enough to shine. The second told the tale of a lonely turtle who discovered that slow journeys often led to the most beautiful places. Another shared a story about an old oak tree that measured its life not by its age, but by the shade it gave to others. Each story ended with hope. Each listener smiled. As the final storyteller closed their book, the children turned toward Walter. One little boy asked, "Mr. Bennett, did we do it right?" Walter looked around the garden. Parents listened quietly from a distance. Grandparents smiled proudly. The lanterns glowed softly. The story tree whispered gently above them. Walter's eyes filled with happy tears. "You did something even better," he said. "What do you mean?" "You didn't copy the stories we told. You created your own." The children beamed with pride. That evening, Walter realized his greatest wish had already come true. The next generation no longer needed someone to teach them how to keep the promise alive. They were already living it. As darkness settled over Ashwood, the children carefully extinguished the lanterns one by one. Before leaving, each child gently touched the trunk of the story tree, as though thanking an old friend. Walter watched quietly. The promise had become stronger than memory. Stronger than tradition. It had become part of who they were. And somewhere, carried gently on the cool autumn breeze, tomorrow's storytellers were already dreaming of the stories they would one day share. Many years passed. The seasons continued their gentle rhythm, painting Ashwood with blossoms in spring, golden sunshine in summer, brilliant colors in autumn, and peaceful snow each winter. The story tree stood strong through them all, its branches reaching toward the sky like open arms welcoming everyone who came. The House of Stories was now cared for by generations of storytellers. Every evening, someone opened its doors. Every night, a gentle story was shared before the lanterns were quietly extinguished. Walter was no longer there to unlock the door each morning. But his kindness remained. It lived in every smile offered to a stranger. In every parent reading softly beside a child's bed. In every notebook waiting to be filled with hope. Years later, a little boy wandered into the story garden with his grandmother. He looked up at the magnificent story tree and asked, "Who planted this?" His grandmother smiled. 4 friends planted something much smaller than a tree. What did they plant? A promise. The boy looked confused. How does a promise grow into a tree? She gently took his hand and led him beneath the wide branches. It grows every time someone chooses kindness instead of anger. Every time someone shares a story instead of keeping it to themselves. Every time someone helps another person without expecting anything in return. The little boy looked around. Families were reading together. Children laughed on the old wooden swing. Visitors left hopeful messages inside the tiny glass bottles. The house of stories welcomed new readers. Birds sang among the branches. Everything felt peaceful. The boy smiled. I think I understand. His grandmother nodded. I hoped you would. Before they left, the boy removed a blank page from his small notebook. He carefully wrote just one sentence. I promised to leave every place a little kinder than I found it. He folded the page and placed it inside the wooden chest buried long ago beneath the story tree, where a small opening had been built so future generations could continue adding their own promises. As evening settled over Ashwood, thousands of lanterns slowly illuminated the story garden. The story tree shimmered beneath the stars. The wind whispered gently through its leaves. If someone had listened very carefully, they might have imagined hearing four old friends laughing together beside a quiet lake. Not because they had returned, but because their promise had never left. And somewhere, perhaps tonight, someone would press play on a bedtime story. They would close their eyes, take a slow, peaceful breath, and drift gently into sleep, carrying hope, kindness, and the quiet belief that every beautiful ending is simply the beginning of another story. The end.